What's up, Penn Staters? Thanks for tuning in to the Football Letter podcast. This week, we welcome Ryan Jones, editor of the Penn Stater magazine, which, of course, is the magazine of the Penn State Alumni Association. Ryan is a 1995 Penn State graduate. When he was in school, he wrote for the Daily Collegian, was an editor for a summer. He covered the 1994 football team, the iconic 1994 football team, attended the 95 Rose Bowl against Oregon. We're here to talk to him about that 94 team, the oral history he wrote on it about a decade ago. Penn State Athletics will honor the 94 team this upcoming football season. And so buckle in, get comfortable. We're going to spend the next 30-some minutes talking about the best football team I've ever seen in person, possibly the best football team in the history of history. We could go on with the accolades. Let's bring in Ryan. Ryan, I'm fortunate to call you a colleague. I appreciate you joining the podcast. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm great, man. Same here. It's great to connect with you in this very cool format, and obviously to talk about certainly one of my all-time favorite teams as well from '94.
Yeah, I'm not big on comparisons or saying, oh, this game was as exciting as this one, but I do. There is a place in my heart for the '94 team. So let's spend some time talking about, Penn State and how you got to become a Penn Stater, because Penn State football played quite a role for you. You grew up in California, but John Cappelletti played a role in how you became a Penn Stater. I just wanted, it's one of my favorite Penn State stories. If you want to share with the audience, how did a California kid end up in Happy Valley?
Yeah. So like you said, Southern California, was a Rams fan, but was kind of just too young to have really appreciated Cappelletti as a pro. But I was in middle school, let's say 7th grade. And I had to do a book report, like a 7th grade book report. And we had a little school library, and I found on the bookshelf Something for Joey, which of course, hopefully most of our listeners and viewers right now will know is the story of John Cappelletti's life, and particularly that run to the Heisman Trophy in '73 that really focused a lot on his family. And of course, his younger brother, Joey, who had leukemia and was really the inspiration for John, right? At his Heisman speech in '73, really memorably, he really ended up talking about his brother. And it was, kind of a real tear-jerking moment for everybody in the building. I mean, I think Gerald Ford was there, obviously Joe Paterno, all these sort of eminent men who were just all kind of tearing up, listening to John tell a story about how his brave little brother was really his inspiration. So I read this book, which was also later made into, I think, a TV movie. And it just stuck with me that, wow, Penn State seems like a really cool place, and Penn State football seems like kind of magical. And, at the time my parents hadn't gone to college. I didn't have an obvious college connection, and it just kind of planted a seed in me that Penn State would be a place I'd want to go someday, and to be a part of a university like that had a football program like that you could root for. And when I started applying for schools, whatever it was, 4, 5, 6 years later, that was, Penn State was still kind of top of my list, and I ended up getting in. And I think I have John Cappelletti indirectly to thank for getting me to Penn State.
Well, thanks for sharing that story, Ryan.
Yeah.
There are books that everyone reads growing up that has a profound impact on them. Something for Joey, that for you. I actually didn't read Something for Joey until much, much later on. But yeah, I encourage all Penn Staters. It's, I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but yeah, definitely worth a read. So just wanted to say, thanks, Ryan, for sharing that before we get started here.
Of course. So
that 1994 team, for those who don't know, I feel like there are some people who say, I'm just going to take a year off and write a book. About a decade ago, you wrote what I think what everyone considers the comprehensive story of the 1994 team. It ended up being an oral history for the Football Letter blog at the time. I was just wondering, there are many different ways that somebody could approach a story or that story. So in terms of, story, format, length, how did you decide how you were going to tackle this iconic story in a way that perhaps hadn't been told before?
It's a great question. I'm a fan of the oral history format. I think as a magazine writer and editor, I think depending on the kind of story you want to tell, it's not the right format for everything. But for a story that's covering a span of time, a process, right? How a thing happened or how a thing evolved, and where you want to get a lot of voices into the story, I think an oral history is a great way to do it. You think of like Ken Burns documentaries, things like that. Those are just oral histories on film, right? You interview a ton of people, and their storytelling carries you through the story. So we've done a couple of them at the magazine here. We did one, I know, John, you remember, on the 93 Penn State Indiana basketball game at Rec Hall, where Penn State essentially did beat Indiana, number one ranked Indiana, except obviously with the help of the refs, the Hoosiers held on to that one. So we've done it for that, and we've done it maybe a couple of other times. But I'm just a big fan of the format. I think when it's the right kind of story to use. And so in thinking about that team, which again, I was here for, as you mentioned, I was on the Collegian, I was a student, season ticket holder. That team was so great and had such an incredible season and had a couple of really key dramatic moments along the way. And also was a team with a lot of characters, in a good way, had a lot of guys who were memorable personalities. And so I thought, I feel like that's the way to tell this story, is to try to get as many of these guys as I can get. And so I started, thankfully, way in advance. I think I probably started maybe close to a year before, or, at least 9 or 10 months, and just started reaching out to folks. Wally Richardson, of course, who was a member of that team, our friend, who runs the Football Letterman's Club now. And some other folks we sort of knew, Spider Caldwell, Kirk Deal, who were both, Spider was a, equipment manager on that team. Kirk Deal was a classmate of mine and a student manager at the time. Just started reaching out to as many guys as I could to say, hey, I'd love to tell this story. I want to talk to all these guys that I can get. Can you help me out? And over time, I got contact information for a lot of those guys. In a few cases, it took talking to one player to get another player's contact information, because some guys were a little harder to get. And eventually, I'd have to go back and look, but what did I get? 20 some guys, got almost the whole offense, starting offense, got maybe half the starting defense, a special teamer or two, a handful of coaches, Kirk and Spider as well. So really just, the more I went, the more I wanted to talk to everybody I could. And so reported it out over months. And then really the most time consuming thing, and John, I know you appreciate this, was trying to figure out, okay, I had all these great stories from all these different people. It was putting them in order and sort of organizing them into a format. And in that case, there was so much good stuff, I didn't want to have to cut much. Luckily with the blog, the Football Letter blog format, it was kind of as much room as we wanted. So I split it up basically into 5 chapters, and it was sort of like, led in with the recruiting classes of like 90 and 91. And then it went for their first couple of years together. And then it got into the beginning of the Big Ten, that first 93 season that was good, but not great. And then kind of broke it down into a couple of the last chapters for the actual 94 season. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. It took a lot of time, but it was a lot of fun. And connecting with all those guys was incredible. We did adapt. You can see the cover behind me here for our September-October 1994 issue. We adapted the section. It was basically just focused on that Illinois game that I think anybody from that season, it really was the most memorable game and moment of that season. The comeback in Champaign against a very good Illinois team, one of the best defenses in the Big Ten. Getting down 21-0 in a hole on the road and coming back and winning that game to stay undefeated. So that was kind of the magazine focus that we did. But as you say, the full oral history lives on the Football Letter blog. And yeah, it was definitely it was a heavy lift, but one I was really proud of and just excited to be able to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Vince Langaro, the producer, who I know smiled when you were talking about Penn State hoops. We'll share this story this season, and certainly when the team is honored. You mentioned so many things I would love to follow up on. Yeah. One is the personalities of the guys. If you read the oral history, I get the impression that they're being candid. They're telling you what it was really like. What it was like to be in that locker room, in that meeting room. As you were having these conversations, one, I was wondering, what was the response from the guys initially? You want to tell this comprehensive oral history. You're hearing from all my former teammates. What was the initial reaction from them? And that as you were having the conversation with them, did you notice their voice, become enthused? Or because sometimes we talk with Letterman, it feels like, they're telling you what it was like in that moment.
Right. Yeah, I think it started with getting some guys who I knew would be reliably good storytellers. Keith Conlon is an obvious one who comes to mind, a guy we know well here at the Alumni Association, who even at the time in 94, we knew Keith, Goon, as many people know him, was a big personality, a big guy, a big character, a great guy, but entertaining, real blunt as a storyteller. So he was a great guy to get into the mix early. I'm trying to think of some of the others. Kajana was a great one, of course, such an important part of that team. Bucky Greeley was a really good one, an important one. And I think the more I got some of those guys, it made it easier to connect with some of the other guys who maybe weren't as eager to talk in general. But once they started going, most of those guys were happy to share those stories. Something, John, you and I were talking about before we started recording, right? But that team was so cohesive. It was a big part of why they were so good that year. There was a lot of buy-in. There was a lot of trust. Those guys trusted each other. I think you saw it on the field. And I think that made it easier to know that once I had started talking to some of those guys, like, oh, okay, we're all kind of in this. And so it made it easier for guys to be comfortable. And again, it's the Alumni Association, the Alumni Magazine. They knew we wanted to tell their story in the right way and in a way that was just going to kind of, remind people of what a great team and a great group of guys that was.
That's the perfect segue. I don't know if responsibility is the right word, but as these guys, you're talking to more guys, they're opening up to you, they're telling you how things were, and how important this team was to the university, how beloved this team is to the fan base. Were you thinking, this is going to be something that resonates? I want to make sure that, to your point, to tell it the right way. So from your perspective, what was the right way to tell this story?
I think just, again, going back to putting it in their words, I sort of, as the format kind of allows or requires, I guess, in between sections of quotes from the guys individually, you're sort of setting the scene a little bit with a little bit of editorial kind of context setting. And so I do that a fair amount in the piece, but it's really about, kind of centering their voices, their perspectives, their memories. Because again, they were the guys who lived it. I have my memories as a fan. Anybody who was old enough to remember that team remembers it as a fan. But it was really about those guys and the experiences they had, from the time they were recruited. Some of my favorite parts of that story are the guys talking about being recruited and when they're first meeting each other in their visits, and some of the stories of, practices then in like 91 and 92, where you've got, Kajana and Kyle Brady and Kerry Collins and these guys on the practice squad. And they're just, beating the heck out of the first team defense because these kids were already so good as true freshmen in a lot of cases. And how even the coaching staff, I was able to talk to Fran Ganner, among others. And Fran's talking about, the way Joe's teams worked, generally you had to earn your way up. And you were the upperclassmen, the seniors in particular, were always going to get the benefit of the doubt. And they recognized that this team was a little bit different because they were just so talented at those young classes, 91 and 90 and 91 recruiting classes, where there was just so much talent. Those kids were ready to play and contribute in a big way early on. So listening to even Fran Ganner talk about, we knew we were going to have to find a way to get these guys on the field. Hearing Brian Milne, who, gained like 3,000 yards or something in high school, was a stud running back from the Erie area, gets here and he's thinking he might be a tailback here, right? And then he looks around him in that running back room. He's like, I'm not better than any of these guys. I'll better be a fullback. You had stories like that. The defensive guys talking about, after a while they had to tell the offensive players, these practice squad guys, you better not make us look bad out here, or we're going to, we're going to make you pay for it, because they knew what they were up against. So there were a lot of great stories like that. Again, I think anybody from that era, if they haven't read it yet, will enjoy hearing the story. So I think that hopefully that answers the question. The right way to tell it, I think, was just to let these guys tell their stories as much as possible. And that's why it ended up being so long online, because I just was reluctant to cut any of those great stories from those guys.
Yeah, so many great stories. As you said, I was reading it today and have reread it a few times. One of the starting offensive linemen in like 92, 93 were going up against, Bucky and Marco and all those guys. And then they would get to the game and they were like, I wasn't having any of the problems that I was having during practice in the week. And so, and that's worth pointing out too, is that it goes beyond the 94 season. It talks about kind of the 4-year journey. And that was a special time, or an important time for Penn State football, the second year in the Big Ten. The national perception, for the most part, they were welcome. There were, a few there were 1 or 2 universities but they were kind of the new kid on the block. And so I guess, what do you remember about that team in person, and how did your memories of that team match up with what you were hearing from the guys firsthand?
So again, being on the collegiate staff, and I wasn't one of the beat writers. Friends of mine were the beat writers, collegiate colleagues of mine. But I wasn't on the beat. I did some feature writing around that team and was one of the editors of the preseason collegiate magazine. So I wasn't, covering them as closely as maybe some of my colleagues, but I was still around those guys a little bit. And I heard a lot of stories secondhand. So I had a sense of what that team was like and what those guys were like, and interacted with a few of them socially, living, obviously being a student, and, having friends who were friends with some of the guys from high school or what have you. So, I had a sense of what that team was about, that there were personalities again on that team, but that it was a pretty tight group, a hardworking group, kind of a self-regulating group, which I think really comes out in the oral history. They were guys who held each other accountable. So I think I had a sense of that. And a lot of that was certainly reconfirmed doing the Q&A, doing the interviews. I think maybe I probably didn't appreciate how fully they sort of took it upon themselves to police themselves. You know what I mean? Obviously the coaches, you've got a coaching staff. That's a big part of what they have to do. These are 18 to 20-year-old guys, right? You got 18 to 22-year-old guys. You got to make sure they're staying out of trouble, going to class, all of that. And this team, I think, in a probably relatively rare way, especially going into that 94 season well in advance, it was about summer workouts before that was necessarily something everybody did, where everybody was here for the summer working out. And it was about taking it seriously. Like, during the season, they weren't going out multiple nights a week. They kind of talked about, we went out Saturday night and celebrated, but the other nights we weren't messing around. We were focused. And so things like that kind of insight that, you probably wouldn't get while they were currently on the team back then. A lot of those guys were kind of happy to talk about, how proud they were of that and how important that was, that the coaches knew they could trust them to kind of take care of business and stay focused.
So I want to mention another adjective, which is humble. So talking with these guys, they seem, soft-spoken, humble, gracious, always talking about what their teammates have done. And this is, I think there was maybe a below the surface level of confidence. They knew how good they were, but there was also a sense of humbleness and kind of what you would expect from Penn State. And this is way before the social media age.
Right.
So, talking with the guys, I just wanted to get the sense of how did you find that balance between they were confident in what they were doing, but there was also a sense of humbleness?
I think you're right, John. The only thing I'd say, like, to maybe slightly tweak that, is that I think there was a cockiness about them when it came to who they were playing against. They went in, and every great team has that, right? We know that. We both covered sports a long time. You can't go out and beat Michigan at Michigan. You can't go out and dominate a Rose Bowl. You can't go out and put 63 on Ohio State, as they did. Still Ohio State's worst ever loss in the modern era, right? You can't do that unless you've got a little arrogance to how you carry yourself on the field. I don't think that carried over into bad sportsmanship or how they handled themselves, off the field, like on campus or anything. But I certainly think they had that hyper confidence that they could beat anybody, that they were, better than everybody they played, that there was no game that they couldn't win. Even Illinois, that confidence to say, no, yeah, we dug a big hole for ourselves. We're going to dig out of it. We're going to go back and win this game. I think really, to your point, John, the humility, and you mentioned it, the sense of their teammates, and it was that unselfishness, right? Which I think is related, where, Kajana Carter, Mike Archie, Stephen Pitts, all three of those guys could have started at most schools in the country. And any one of them might have transferred or gone somewhere else in the first place when they saw that they were all going to be here together. They all chose to stay. They all chose, including Kajana, right, had to sacrifice some carries and some numbers because they knew they were part of something great. And, Kerry Collins could have complained that he wasn't getting enough attempts, and Kajana could have complained that he wasn't getting enough carries because maybe, right, we all know the story. I think anybody old enough to remember, the joke was that, Kerry probably cost Kajana the Heisman, and Kajana probably cost Kerry the Heisman, right? Because Kerry had a phenomenal year, best Davey O'Brien winner, I think, right? Best quarterback in the country. Kajana averaged 7 points, some yards per carry, phenomenal. But again, that offense was so balanced. It was about sharing. It was about being unselfish. So I think that really permeated that whole team. And I think that does absolutely come through. Is those guys had a high level of confidence in what they could do, and they were not shrinking from any competition, any opponent. But I think the unselfishness and the genuine sense of being willing to sacrifice for each other and for team goals was apparent in the results and how they played then, and something really they all spoke to still when we spoke in 2014.
You mentioned the Illinois game. I wanted to follow up with that to see. I was going to ask you how much of a microcosm that was for kind of how they approach things, but also just like the confidence that they had. I believe, one of the Chicago papers was saying that the players were laughing in the huddle, or, there was this iconic late drive from Kerry Collins. Yeah. Specifically this game at Illinois, as those players were telling that story about that game, that drive, What was it like for you to relive that through their eyes, knowing just how pivotal that game was and that drive was?
It was incredible. And a quick story. So again, I was on the collegiate. I was covering the men's soccer team, and men's soccer, the Big Ten tournament was in Columbus that day. So I was in Columbus, Ohio with a couple. There's Brian Milne. He was so tough, man. Sure, I'm sure he still is. But so we were in Columbus, Ohio, covering the Big Ten men's soccer tournament, and the game ended that we were covering, and we run back to the car. Again, this is pre-social media, pre-smartphones. We run back to the car and turn on the radio, and literally the first thing we hear is the Nittany Lions score to cut the lead to 21-7. And we went, what? Like we were like disbelief, right? I think this might be the touchdown run here. I don't want to talk over this. Brian Milne. Yeah, they're not stopping him. Yeah. So that's the culminating drive, just phenomenal. So we ended up driving quickly to the Damons, which I don't think is there anymore, but it was a Damons in Columbus, Ohio. The three of us decked out in Penn State gear, of course, in the middle of Columbus, and got a table to watch. And, everybody else, I don't know who Ohio State was playing that day, but we're these three random Penn Staters watching Penn State make that comeback and going crazy, in the second half as they come back at Illinois. It was a weird game in the fact that they did dig themselves a hole that it looked like it was going to be tough to dig out of. But I think to a man, those guys talked about, we never thought we were out of that game. Kerry Collins is the quarterback, obviously, the leader of the offense. He was so matter of fact about it. He's like, no, we just, we had to clean a couple things up. We made some mistakes. It was going to be fine. Like they really, I don't think ever doubted, maybe if it had been 28-0, maybe they reached that point, but they always knew they could get back in. They were confident the defense would step up, and, they'd committed a couple turnovers early. They were sloppy. It just was not a typical Penn State game. And if you read the piece, not only the Football Letter blog piece, but the magazine piece as well, it really focused on that Illinois game. The night before, they had kind of this insane hotel situation. They didn't get a lot of sleep. They didn't get a good pregame meal. The power was out for a while. There were suggestions of sabotage, like literally. So that was kind of the starting point for that game. And they dig themselves that hole, and they gradually come back, and pull it out at the end. And you're right. It was reported after the fact, and a couple of the guys confirmed it. They come out to huddle for that last offensive drive, and they were so loose. The tension in the building, because the home fans are worried they're going to blow it. And in that offensive huddle, they're laughing like, we're good. They knew what they were capable of. And they really felt when they were locked in offensively, and the season really bore this out, they could not be stopped. That offense, as long as they didn't make mistakes, you didn't stop them. So, and they proved that out.
You are tuned into the Football Letter podcast. We are speaking with Ryan Jones, editor of the Penn Stater magazine, and notably for me, former longtime editor of Slam, which I read cover to cover growing up, Hoops magazine based in New York City. We are talking about the 1994 Penn State football team. Brian, being on campus as a student, even just throughout the fall semester, what are your memories of just what campus was like, the buzz, the activity, knowing that the football team was doing so well? Any memories there for you?
I think anyone who's ever been at University Park for a fall when the team was good, right, has that shared memory of there is a buzz and electricity and excitement in the air for game weekends, but kind of all the time, right, when the team's having a great season. And again, especially a season like that where they never did lose. Every week the stakes get a little bigger, and some games are bigger than others. But it was a lot of fun. It was really an electric atmosphere the entire fall. And those guys, again, it's on some level it's kind of always true, right? But that team especially, there was just so much star power on that offense. Kajana was big smile. He was electric and kind of magnetic. Carey's just a giant of a guy, and he was so good. Bobby Ingram. But all those guys. So it was just kind of they were kind of definitely the big men on campus that year, probably more than most. And it was just a lot of fun. And you knew that they were building toward something big. As long as they could just kind of keep winning, you knew that the potential was there for kind of a really unforgettable season. So yeah, I'm certainly biased, but that was definitely the most fun fall that I had in my time on campus. And again, the fact that a lot of those guys were personalities, and I knew a few of them kind of directly or indirectly, you had a sense that it was a fun group to root for, and obviously an incredibly fun group to watch.
And you brought up the point that I was going to ask you about, Ryan. how they handled themselves on the field, off the field, their personalities, how likable they were. Of course, like we're biased, we love Penn State and Penn State football, but just it just felt like this was a team that you would want to root for. These were good guys that you wanted to see do well. They had overcome so much adversity, and in some cases had learned their lessons, growing up, becoming a man. How much of that was something that maybe, you noticed as you were writing the oral history, or even just something you reflect on, is that like this was just a great group of guys to cheer for?
It absolutely was. I wrote about it, obviously, and you mentioned, kind of the adversity certain guys overcome. Bobby Ingram, whose father had died either right before he got to campus or shortly thereafter, if I'm remembering correctly, and who kind of got into a minor legal issue and was basically about to get kicked off the team, and sort of had a second chance, and that was something Joe gave guys a lot of times. I think he saw that this was not a bad guy, not a bad kid, but a kid who had made a mistake under tough circumstances. And Bobby came back and obviously was a phenomenal player. And from everything I've ever heard, a model teammate and leader and everything else. Chris Mazik, defensive lineman who had been shot. I think it was like a passerby kind of wrong place, wrong time thing when he was, I believe, in high school, got shot through the leg. And ended up coming back and still being a really phenomenally tough presence on that defensive line. And then Brian Milne, who I think it was Hodgkin's, right? Basically a cancer survivor. Again, just a mountain of a man, a phenomenal athlete. I think a national record holder at the time, or national champ one year in the discus, if I remember correctly. I needed to revisit this stuff. It's been so long now. But so you had guys who had overcome, real important things in their personal life, difficult things in their personal lives, and all kind of, came through those things stronger and better. And I think those were rallying points for the guys on that team. They knew they had guys who had overcome some things and had to tough out, difficult situations, and had to learn from things and had to endure things, however you want to put it. And those stories we knew, those are stories we had told in the collegiate and that were pretty well known by that time. So I think, you had a sense of, these being guys who were pretty easy to root for. And then again, you also had the kind of charisma, star power of guys like Kajana, Bobby Ingram, Carey, all those, the offensive skill players in particular, were superstars at that point. So it was, like I said, a very fun team to root for, but I think an easy group of guys to rally behind. And again, like we talked about, you got the sense pretty early on, these were guys who were willing to sacrifice for each other and put team before their own stats or anything else. And that's why they had such an incredible season that they did.
Reading the oral history, I had learned, I'm pretty sure I hadn't known it before. I think it might have, Tom Bradley said that when Brian Milne was in the hospital, like all the other schools who had offered him scholarships pulled their scholarship offer, and Penn State kept their scholarship offer to Brian to say, even if you can't play football, you still have a scholarship here. And like for him, that was, motivation, not that he needed extra motivation, but I just felt that was one of those things that I got out of the oral history that made me think, this is just such another great storyline to root for these guys.
Yeah, I think Brian, I spoke to him, 10 plus years ago now, and Brian still was kind of emotional talk about it. That was 20 years later at the time, that I think it was Joe, I think maybe Fran delivered the news. I think you're right, but, or Tom Bradley, excuse me, whoever it was. But if Joe's saying, this guy's got a scholarship here, whether he can play or not, he's got a scholarship. And there were other instances of Joe doing that over the years, that were known. It was cool. And again, to have a guy come back who, didn't know if he would live, let alone be able to play football again. It was a phenomenal, one of the great Pennsylvania high school running backs of all time, and just a phenomenal two-sport athlete, to be able to come back and contribute like he did on that team, and again score the winning touchdown in their sort of biggest, most memorable comeback game of the year was pretty perfect.
All right, we'll ask you a few more questions about the '94 team here, Ryan, and then I want to get your thoughts on a few other things. But there should be like 5 parts of the podcast talking about the oral history. Like, all right, we're only going to talk about part 1 today. So you were in Pasadena for the '95 Rose Bowl. It's funny, we just had on a guest, a volunteer leader, who they were watching the '95 Rose Bowl, and they knew that after Kajana ran that touchdown, they wanted to become a Penn Stater. And so just felt like throwing that out. Yeah. Being in Pasadena for that game, that was were you covering the game for the Collegiate? Were you out there as a fan? And just what do you remember about what the Rose Bowl was like that day, filled with so many Penn Staters?
Yeah, it was great. So I was out there as a fan, had a ticket, and I mentioned earlier I'm from Southern California, so I had a lot of family there. I went to the game with, was very lucky to be able to do that. Definitely the night before Nebraska beats Miami, basically clinching, the pre-playoff, pre-BCS coaches poll. Everybody knew that as long as Nebraska won that game, they were probably going to win the championship in the voters' eyes, which they did. I don't think anybody, certainly on that 94 team, there's nobody on that team who thinks that they wouldn't have beaten Nebraska, and I, of course, agree. But so we remember watching that game the night before, and there was a sense of disappointment that the national championship was probably out of Penn State's hands at that point, through no fault of their own. So that was a bummer. But I think game day, people woke up and was like, hey, we're playing in the Rose Bowl. We're playing for an undefeated season. You can't take that away from us, right? So I think there was excitement among fans and a confidence and we hadn't been to the Rose Bowl in a long, long time at that point. Second year in the Big Ten. So there was a lot to celebrate. I remember seeing Tiger Woods, who I don't know how old he was in 1994, if he was at Stanford at the time, maybe. But like he happened to be walking up like the bleachers at the Rose Bowl. And people recognized him. He was just starting to get famous. So it was like a weird sort of like, hey, well, there's that young golf kid who's supposed to be pretty good. So that was kind of funny. It felt like a very California thing to have happen. And then just the game itself, again, come out with that first offensive possession. And the guys talk about it in the story, but, that first play from scrimmage that Kajana burst for 80 yards was kind of a mistaken. Yeah, here you go. Like they kind of blew the play. Like they didn't get it right. And he broke it for a touchdown anyway. It kind of spoke to the individual excellence of all these individual guys on this team and within the unit, where I don't know if they blocked it wrong. And then he almost trips as well. Like he should have been down, but then look what he does. Like that was him and that was that team. It was just, and this image here when they get him right at the end, that's just the most amazing, running into the camera right toward the blue band. Just phenomenal. So from there, it was like, all right, there's no way we're going to lose this game. Hopefully we'll run them out of the stadium. And, they sort of coasted to what I think it was 38-20, right? Kind of coasted to an 18-point win. It was clear throughout that we were the much better team. Oregon, obviously, before they became sort of the innovative juggernaut they were over the past maybe 10 or 15 years. But it's sort of like, it looks like a typical, but yeah, he almost trips over his own feet, misread the block, or the block was in the wrong place, could have got knocked down there. And then there he goes. So, and then my memory leaving the stadium, Kirk Deal, who I mentioned, a classmate of mine. Kirk, if you're listening, thanks again, buddy. He was a student equipment manager at the time, and he's walking off the field, and we were close enough to where the team came off that I was able to yell down, Kirk, what's going on? Just seeing a classmate was kind of cool. And he waves up and looks at me, and then he stops and he pulls something out of his belt and throws it up to me. And it's a pair of Nike gloves, like football gloves. So again, pre-internet for the most part, pre-cell phone, I don't get to talk to him again until we're back on campus a week or two later. And I say, who are these gloves from? And he said, oh, those are Kajana's. And you can see him wearing the gloves. Well, I don't know if it's the same pair, but, he wore like a black and white Nike glove, like a lot of the guys did on that team. But he had a fumble not too long after that touchdown run. And I guess he was annoyed at himself, and he was kind of blaming the gloves. So he took the gloves and threw them. And Kirk picked them up. And so apparently those are the gloves that I have, or the gloves that Kajana started the Rose Bowl with in 1994, thanks to my pal Kirk. I know I've told you that story before.
I just have to let the room breathe when you tell that story, Ryan. It demands respect and attention. That story.
It's a fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun, so.
Yeah. Kirk Deal.
I should say after the fact, at some point later, I did get Kajana to sign them. So I think he kind of looked at me like, how did you get these? I'm like, Kirk had them. And I'm like, you don't need him back, Kajana. Don't worry. You got plenty of good stuff. Don't ask for him back, please. So he was cool with it.
Yeah, absolutely. God, I could just keep talking to you, Ryan. So I think maybe one way I think we can maybe wrap this up, at least in terms of the 94 team. And I know you appreciate this, the idea of preserving stories, tradition, the idea of making sure that, the Penn State audience and even the broader audience knows about this story told from the player's perspective. Just how important was it to get this story told in the right way? And then after it was released, did you have a sense of relief, satisfaction? And just kind of like, what was the response from the guys after they, because they were talking to you one-on-one, what was their response when they ended up reading, the finished story?
Yeah, I think relief, satisfaction, all the above to answer that part of the question, right? It felt really good to have it done. Again, it took a long time. and just very happy to have it out in the world. And, as sort of once I was done with it, I realized pretty much right away, probably while I was still working on it, a lot of people aren't going to read this whole thing. We were talking about it earlier. It's long. It's a lot of words. I don't remember how many, but it's substantial. But the magazine version, it was like, okay, if people wanted to just focus on that 94 game, still get a taste of it and have a lot of the personalities involved. But for the folks who hopefully made their way through the whole thing and still could, I think if you were a Penn State fan of that era, there's a lot there that you would really enjoy. You'd get a kick out of. And again, it's because of the guys telling the stories who were there, who were a part of that team, or the players, or the coaches, or, again, in a couple of cases, guys like Kirk and Spider who were on the sidelines and had unique perspective of their own. But yeah, listen, I mean, you and I, we both work for the Alumni Association, right? I mean, it's important to us to share these stories that a lot of our alumni appreciate and remember and have a connection to. And I love that part of our jobs. And I think we know a lot of our alumni appreciate that, right? Hopefully the folks watching and listening to this appreciate the fact the ability to relive great memories like that. So, I mean, honestly, it's an honor to be in a position to help tell that kind of story. And I couldn't have really done it anywhere else. If I was working in a newspaper, even a Penn State kind of media entity, someone who covers Penn State closely, they're probably not going to spend that much time telling a story from that long ago. You got to focus understandably on this year's team, and there's so much to cover. So to be in a position where I could kind of take the time, working around my daily schedule and talk to as many of those guys as I could, it's an honor. Really, lucky to be in this position and have this role. And to your point, I mean, I think that the players that I did hear from after the fact, I've seen a few over the years and heard from a few others. I think they all really appreciated it. As ever with a thing like that, some guys are maybe more nostalgic than others, and some guys are like, oh, it was great. It was, it's a memory from my past, but whatever. I kind of just moved on. But a lot of the guys really clearly value what they value is the memories of each other, right? Memories of being teammates, memories of the work they put in together, the moments they shared together. I think whenever you talk to guys who are high level athletes, not guys, I mean, men, women, whoever, when you ever talk to high level athletes, it's those memories of working together and competing together and enduring difficult moments together that they really miss when they're done. And so I think having a chance to share those and revisit those, a lot of the guys really appreciate it. And so, again, that made it great for me to be able to be the one who heard the stories from them and got to share them with our alumni and Penn State fans.
You are tuned into the Football Letter podcast. We are speaking with Ryan Jones, Legends of 94, the oral history. That is the name of the story, the comprehensive story of the 1994 Penn State football team, which we'll share, which has been shared before over the years. We're talking with Ryan on the 10-year anniversary of releasing that story. And the 94 team will be honored this season upcoming at Beaver Stadium. So just transitioning a little bit, Ryan. So we're talking here Thursday, August 15th. The Penn State varsity sports season actually kicks off today. Erica Dombach's squad hosts a top 10 matchup at Jeffrey Field this evening. I know you're a big fan of her and the men's team. Let's just stick with the soccer for a moment. What is how much do you enjoy Jeffrey Field in the fall, that backdrop of Beaver Stadium? Because I know you're a big fan of that sport and have an appreciation for what they do.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the sport, but both the programs here. Erica, who you mentioned, coached the women's team, a national championship winning coach. She's been an assistant with the U.S. national team. Honestly, I mean, I don't know, but I don't think it's crazy to think that Erica could have been the head coach of the women's national team by now. She'd really wanted it, but I think, it's not my place to say. But she's at that level of respect in the game. But she's a Penn Stater, even though she's not an alum. She is a Penn Stater through and through. I know her family's here. Her parents are in town, have been for a long time. She's got a great family. Her husband, Jason, and their 2 daughters. Just a great person. Everything you want out of someone representing Penn State as a coach, and recruits really talented, sharp, hardworking young women, including 2 Olympians, 2 Olympic gold medalists, as we know, Sam Coffey and Alyssa Nair, who just started and won gold with the U.S. women's team at the Olympics. And so to have that kind of program that attracts that kind of talent and those kind of people, it's been really neat to get to know Eric a little bit. And yeah, I love getting out to those games. Jeff as well, the men's program, who again, I covered when I was here many years ago. I know some of the folks around that program as well. And I think they're a very, very good program that's getting better as well, and hopefully are even higher up in the national picture soon. Jeffrey Field is special to me. Usually those are kind of the earliest games in the fall schedule up here, as you mentioned. Tonight, Thursday, August 15th, is the women's season opener. This time of year, it tends to be pretty up here, as folks know. And to be at Jeffrey Field on a nice, warm but not too hot, just starting to cool down night, and Beaver Stadium in the background, you get the sunsets up there that are incredible, and you get some really good soccer. It's kind of my favorite place to be on campus a lot of times. No knock on Beaver Stadium or anywhere else, but there's something special about Jeffrey Field, and that Beaver Stadium backdrop, Mount Nittany up over behind the BJC. There's a lot that makes it a really, really wonderful setting. So I'm excited for some of the improvements they've got coming for Jeffrey Field too. That'll make it an even better facility, I think, for those programs, and a better fan experience as well. But yeah, I love getting up there. I'm excited for that season to start.
Yeah, a lot of renovations, construction. When I picture what that part of campus is going to look like 2, 3, 4 years from now, it's exciting.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap up with this, Ryan. So whether it's football, soccer, another of the varsity athletic programs, once we get into September, now we can bring in hoops, November, December. What are a few things that you're looking forward to between now and the end of the calendar year when it comes to Penn State athletics?
Again, man, kind of all the above. I mean, field hockey's got that really nice new improved facility with that big grandstand. Laura Gebhardt, who's an alum and an assistant coach with field hockey, is a friend, and I know how excited they all are. Another program that had an Olympian on the U.S. team, Fia Gladio, I always mispronounce her name, but one of many Penn Staters who were involved in the Olympics for us this year, a field hockey alum. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting some games over there. Women's volleyball, of course, looking like they're set for another really good year. I feel like that program's in great shape and kind of resurgent. Not that they were ever not surgent, but I feel like they're heading in the right direction as well. So yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot going on. The falls here are special. Anybody knows. And even the sports that maybe you don't think of as sort of spectator sports primarily, but like cross country, we got great cross country programs here. At the magazine here, one of the members of our art and design team, Nick Sloff, his son Nicholas is a sophomore on the cross country team. So we've kind of got connections all over the place, which makes it really special. So I'm excited to get back to Beaver Stadium, of course, longtime season ticket holder. But yeah, this is kind of the year that I really try to soak up every sporting event I can. I think you're the same way. It's just a lot of fun. The spirit's great. The teams are generally terrific. Players and coaches, again, that it's pretty easy to root for. So it's a lot of fun. It's great. It's a great time of year to be here.
Absolutely. Fortunate to call Penn State home. Ryan Jones, one of the most impressive stories I've ever read. I grew up with that team, 1994. And so that was like rereading my childhood. Just really, really impressive. And just wanted to thank you for stopping by the podcast and really for telling that story, like you said, the right way. So thank you, Ryan.
I appreciate it, man. You make me feel old when you say it was reminding you of your childhood, but otherwise, no, I appreciate it. Like you said, it was a labor of love, and lucky to be in a position to tell it, but I appreciate the chance to come in and talk about it. It's always fun.
All right. Ryan Jones, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. What's up, Penn Staters? Thanks for tuning into the Football Letter podcast. This week, we welcome volunteer leader Kelly Gibson Caplan. Kelly is a 1991 Penn State graduate of the College of the Liberal Arts, and Kelly is a standout volunteer leader who serves on the Alumni Association's executive board, in addition to chairing the Engagement and Awards Committee for Alumni Council. Also notably, Kelly will be judging this weekend's homecoming parade. We're going to get her thoughts on homecoming, what inspires her to give back to Penn State, and just maybe a couple other fun topics. Kelly is a joy to speak with. It's going to be a lot of fun catching up with her. Kelly Gibson Caplan, let's welcome you into the Football Letter podcast. How are you doing today?
John, I am doing fabulous. How about you?
I said before, I'm also going with fabulous, and so we are going to have a fabulous conversation here. So most immediate homecoming weekend coming up this weekend. What are you looking forward to during homecoming weekend?
Oh my gosh, homecoming is the best time of the year. And the reality is my favorite thing, John, is the ice cream social for alumni at the Hints Alumni House. It has been a chance over the years to just meet up with like old friends and meet new friends and hear from the Alumni Blue Band and just get really jazzed and excited for homecoming weekend. So there's a lot of things about homecoming I love, but that is what comes to my mind first.
Yes, that's the perfect way to kick off homecoming weekend. So that is Friday afternoon, 1 to 3 at the Hintz Family Alumni Center. The Nittany Lions is usually there, band and cheerleaders, the Alumni Blue Band, which is a treat. So that's the place to be Friday afternoon from 1 to 3. So a few hours after the ice cream social, Kelly, you will be judging the homecoming parade, which I believe you've done for the last several years. You will be set up at the corner of College and Allen, this iconic spot in State College. What are your emotions like as a diehard Penn Stater homecoming weekend, enjoying the homecoming parade, and you've got so much camaraderie going on with Penn Staters in that area?
Oh, it is the pinnacle, right? The homecoming parade is the pinnacle, and it's the start of an amazing weekend after the ice cream social. And what I love the most is the joy and the enthusiasm of the spectators that are waiting to watch the parade. And then, of course, we get to judge the Penn State Alumni Association entries, the chapters and the societies and the AIGs, and just the energy that everybody puts into creating their entry and the marching and the lights and the joy and the enthusiasm and the chanting. Some people even bring us food, which we love. It is absolutely the best, and it is a privilege. And John, you're absolutely right. This is the third year of doing it, and it is so much fun, and it's hard to decide who the winners are. But we get the benefit of seeing all the great entries. And let's not forget the students, the fraternities, the sororities, all the different groups within the Penn State family also get to march in that parade. So it is an excellent thing. And I hope that everybody listening comes out to the parade and just enjoys themselves. It's a great, amazing, fun thing to do.
It absolutely is. And the homecoming parade also comes to mind like Thon, like Penn State football, in terms of seeing the power of the Penn State network on display. You've got so much diversity. You have alumni groups. You've got the student groups. Of course, our student groups, Blue and White Society, Lion Ambassadors. Our CEO, Paul Clifford, will be in the parade. Our president and vice president, Anand Gunjam, and Susan Robinson. So, Kelly, when you are judging parade floats, what stands out to you? How can a group get high marks from you on their parade float? What are you keeping an eye out for?
So enthusiasm, right? Passion, excitement, that's a big one. Creativity. We want to see that the group has kind of thought about what they're going to bring. And there have been some really super clever things over the years that we've seen. But the most important is the enthusiasm, the energy, and the creativity. And just have fun. That's what parades are about. That's what Penn State is about. And it really is, John, like you said, it is just really the full-on display of Penn State at its best. And that is why I love judging the parade. And that's why I've done it for the last 3 years.
So from the perspective of a passionate Penn Stater, from the perspective of a volunteer leader for the Alumni Association, how critical is the role of the Alumni Association, you think, on homecoming weekend, being that front door for alumni, welcoming them back to Penn State, and playing a crucial role in however they want to celebrate homecoming?
Well, the Penn State Alumni Association, like you said, is the organization. It is how alumni stay connected with the university. So whether you graduated from University Park or you graduated from World Campus or one of the Commonwealth campuses or all the other amazing things that we offer that folks can graduate from, it is really that entry point. And the Alumni Association has incredible benefits. I don't really need to tell you, John, but the career services, I reinvented myself 4 years ago and connected in with the career services as an alumni. That was an amazing set of services. And the events that the Alumni Association plans, obviously we mentioned the ice cream social, but the doing the guarding the Nittany Lion and having that shrine after the parade, just to make sure that because we've had issues over the years with teams defacing the Nittany Lion and really defacing the Nittany Lion. So that is a tradition that the Alumni Association upholds and has been doing for decades. And I think it is an amazing and beautiful one. But the Penn State Alumni Association is that connection back to school. And I didn't mention the students, the connection and with the students. That is why we all volunteer for Penn State, is we want to make sure that the students, current and future students, have the same amazing transformative experiences that we had. I know that's why I volunteer, and I'm part of the Alumni Association and Alumni Council, is just making sure we're kind of making the magic happen for all.
I love the way that you say that, making the magic happen for all. We're going to reset here. You are listening to the Football Letter Podcast, or perhaps you're watching the Football Letter Podcast. Either way, thank you for tuning in. We are speaking with volunteer leader Kelly Gibson Caplan about this weekend's upcoming homecoming weekend. So just to reset here, Friday afternoon, 1 to 3, ice cream social at the Alumni Center. We'll actually be live streaming the first set of the Alumni Blue Band, which will start about 10 after 1, a quarter after 1. And then they'll go on again a little bit after 2. Homecoming parade starts at 6. Guard the Line Shrine, as Kelly mentioned, will begin at 7:30, go for a couple hours. And yes, most years, almost every year, Sue Paterno will be there. She will explain the story of how this got started. Do you want to tell that story, Kelly?
I'm going to let you tell it, because I don't probably have the full richness of the story, John, that you have. So I'm going to pass it back to you.
So during Joe Paterno's, I want to say his early days, his first decade, Sue was disappointed a little bit in the school spirit on campus leading up to homecoming weekend. And so she thought it would be fun to play a prank and to throw some orange paint on the Nittany Lions shrine that could easily be washed off, by the way, that should be noted. But she thought just that image would fire up the students. However, Syracuse then really did deface the Nittany Lions shrine. And so that was how the tradition started. Sue Paterno wanting to fire up campus and the students. And so there's the whole story is so much fun to read. Like, she was out to dinner with her family, and you can read about Joe's reaction, and Sue tells it better than anyone. But Sue Paterno is the heart and the beginning of Guard the Line Shrine, and she is still passionate about it. I understand she has a great connection and relationship with the Lion ambassadors. So if you want to hear Sue Paterno herself tell the story of how Guard the Line Shrine got started, that's where you need to be Friday night of homecoming weekend at the Nittany Lions Shrine, starting about 7:30 when the first parade groups start wrapping up. I know, Kelly, we were talking about homecoming and how much you're looking forward to that. Homecoming, it's important at every school, but especially at a place like Penn State that has such a rich tradition. What do you see homecoming playing that role in terms of connecting Penn Staters of all generation? Because as you said, whether you graduated a couple years ago or a couple decades ago, you're at Penn Stater. And so how vital is homecoming, you think, in keeping those connections among Penn Staters of different generations?
Oh, gosh, I think it's critical. I think the reality is that, we all had our friends while we were at Penn State. But the beauty of homecoming is we can connect with those old friends and those friends that we've had forever. But man, you go and you can see Penn Staters, all the ages, all the demographics. And I love the buttons, the graduation year buttons that are always available at the ice cream social to kind of indicate the year that you graduated. But man, there's no better way to connect with old and new friends than at homecoming. And there's so many different activities. Of course, we have the football game and the homecoming parade and the ice cream social and guarding the lion shrine. There's just so many ways for Penn Staters to connect. And we all know it's about the Penn State network and the richness of the Penn State network. And the Alumni Association plays a critical, pivotal role in keeping all those connections going and creating new connections. And like I said before, connecting with the students. I know that, John, I am constantly mesmerized by what students are doing and the fact that they have double majors and double minors and they're studying abroad and they're having transformative experiences. There is no better way to stay connected from a networking perspective and meeting new people, but also connecting with the students and hearing the amazing things that they're doing and, you know, what the future generation of Penn Staters are gonna look like. It swells my heart. And we see the alma mater in the background. It just with all that happens, it just really swells my heart with fame.
Kelly, I'm so glad you mentioned the class buttons. That is something else that you can pick up at the ice cream social.
Yes. I wish I had my button handy. I thought I did.
We can get another one this
Nope.
weekend.
Oh, here it
You
is.
got it?
There it is. I knew I had it in my office. I just needed to find it. So I think this is a really cool element of the day.
Yeah, and it can be a great conversation starter among graduates of different years or even graduates of the same year or the same era. You are tuned into the Football Letter podcast. We are speaking with volunteer leader Kelly Gibson Caplan. Kelly, let's talk a little bit about your Penn State experience. You've talked before about the values that you learned at Penn State in terms of hard work, service, community, leadership. What was so special about your student experience that you wanted to extend that Penn State experience as an alumna?
So I had the privilege of involving myself in a lot of different groups while I was there, while I was on campus. And it changed my life. The character building that happened, the lessons that I learned, and of course, academically, you're learning a lot. I mean, that's a given. But the lessons really in college are learned from, I love the photos, are really learned from the organizations that you're involved in. I took on several leadership roles while I was there with the Student Hearing Board. I was a orientation leader sophomore year for new students that were coming on campus. I leveraged and built my community through the interests that I had and the activities that I had. And so when I graduated from Penn State, like the leadership, the community building, the service, all of those things were really part and parcel to who I already was as a person. But boy, Penn State really built even further and more deeply on those attributes. And I'm so thankful because I had an amazing time, and there just really aren't words to share the impact that Penn State had on my life. So giving back and paying it forward has been a super important thing to me, and being involved with the Alumni Council and the Alumni Association has just strengthened that. And I'm so honored and privileged by getting to judge the parade. And I love this photo. This was from a few years ago. It's the penultimate, is really when everybody comes together and gets to meet old and new friends and have fun and celebrate together, because for all of us, those are our transformative years.
Yeah, let's stick with this topic just for another question or two then, Kelly. With Executive Board and Alumni Council, how do you see your role in those groups in terms of being a representative of alumni, speaking up for alumni, making sure that all voices are heard? Obviously, it's a responsibility that you take seriously for some of the reasons that you mentioned. But just wondering if you can maybe, expand on that a little bit and see how do you see your role fitting into those groups?
So I came to Alumni Council from the Liberal Arts Alumni Society Board. And I loved that view because I got to dig more deeply into the college from which I graduated. And John mentioned that earlier. So that was an amazing experience. And so when I had the opportunity and I learned about Alumni Council and I was appointed my first year, that privilege and honor of representing College of Liberal Arts, 1991, it is a privilege and an honor to be sort of that liaison between alumni and the university and the Alumni Association. And to your point, I do take it amazingly seriously because I had this amazing experience. And so for me to be able to lead and to be part of an organization where we have amazing leaders from all the different colleges, all the different Commonwealth campuses, like the representation on Alumni Council is deep because we want all the voices at the table. And so to have the privilege of being one of those voices at the table, to interact with alumni, to connect them with students, to open up the door even more widely into Penn State and all that is happening now, because of course, compared to when I was there in the 90s and the 80s, things have changed dramatically. There's so many beautiful new buildings, and there's so many amazing new programs and initiatives and things that are happening that it is just awesome. And it is something that I take very seriously. And that is serving on the board and being that leader and being able to talk about how we're going to get our alumni to engage more deeply and to interact with us and with the university. And with awards, we get to recognize these amazing, inspiring leaders and volunteers that are doing great things to continue to just bring Penn State to the forefront. So it's an honor and a privilege, John, and I'm just so thankful to be involved. And so these are some classic times of undergrad. So these photos are making me smile.
Yeah, what's going on in these photos, Kelly?
Oh, okay. So the left, we invited, when I was part of the student hearing board, we invited Raina Green to speak at the university. And she was, and I can't remember which Indigenous people that she was representing, but she came on campus and she was the most eloquent speaker. And I got the privilege of introducing her. That other photo was the student hearing board that particular year. I think that was in 1991. And then of course my cap and gown photo, of course, from graduation. And some of these other photos, my husband and I went to the Galapagos Islands in 2022 with the Penn State Alumni Association. And it was awesome. You can see all these fun photos that we had. It was I will tell you, the career services, being able to be with other Penn Staters and travel. I encourage anybody and everyone to look very seriously at the amazing travel programs. It was educational. We were with other Penn Staters and we dug in deeply into the culture and the Galapagos Islands. It was a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, that was a great trip. We've heard good things. Vince and I, our superstar colleague, Jenny Harchak, she heads up the travel program for the Alumni Association. And the gentleman who led that tour, I believe he's worked in the islands for quite some time, was very knowledgeable. It sounds like
Yes.
you had a great time, Kelly. The
Carter
pictures were
Hunt.
great.
Yep,
Yes.
Carter is a professor at Penn State, and his fiance there, Carolina, to his right, she also has worked down in the Galapagos Islands and has done some amazing work. So they were amazing co-hosts because they knew inside and out the islands, because we went to several of them on the trip.
I just want to take a minute and pause here, Kelly. Like, you have got me fired up talking about engaging our alumni, opening the door more widely. I'm sitting here, supposed to be calm, cool, collected, doing this interview. And I'm like, you've got me ready to like run through a wall like a football coach. And so I just want to say,
Good.
Good. Yeah. Like,
Well,
you never disappoint, Kelly. So along these lines of, engaging alumni, making sure that the door is opening more widely, we have so many alumni who perhaps, want to get involved, but they just haven't taken that first step yet. What would be one or two pieces of advice that you would have for them about maybe a way that they could get started?
I think the most important thing is to think about, what did you love while you were at Penn State? Was there something about the Commonwealth campus that you went to? Did your College of Liberal Arts or Engineering, was there something about that jazzed you? Thinking about what interested you and piqued your interest while you were at Penn State and layering that with kind of where you are now in your life. There is so many ways to engage. And for me, I got re-engaged with Penn State through mentoring. I started mentoring liberal arts students. And I have to tell you, it is and was some of the most important work that I do, and being able to work with students and do mock interviews and look at their resumes and kind of help them navigate as they're moving into graduation. It is amazing. But I think you just need to look at what you love and connect in with Penn State. And there are so many ways to plug in. Maybe you were an athlete. I mean, there's just so many ways. You just need to think about that and then reach out to your college, to the organization that you were involved in, to the campus, and connect in and start, because we always need volunteers. We need the time and the treasure. And so it is some of the best things that I do, and being involved with Penn State just continues. I am always super jazzed about everything that I do and have done with Penn State and the Alumni Association. It is the best. And I'm glad I'm getting you ready to run through a wall, John. That really fires me up big time.
I'm going to keep this interview like on replay on my phone. So like whenever I'm, have the 2:00 blues, like I'm going to fire this up and be ready to go. You talking about the affiliate group networks, and you talked about, all the different ways that you can stay connected and what somebody was passionate about. Alumni Association membership includes it's 245 affiliate groups.
Yes.
We have chapter presidents on the podcast talking about their watch parties and how they unite Penn Staters. So we got to talk a little football here. So I saw you recently at the beginning of the season. We were at West Virginia. The Friday night event was at a wonderful place called Tropics. We weren't sure what to expect, but we showed up, and we've talked with folks who have done this for a long time. It was one of the best Friday night events we've had on the road. You were there following up a couple of days of executive board meetings. How special was that environment to kick off the football season like that with Penn Staters?
That event was, I think, extra cool because it was outside and they had a tropical sort of environment that they had created. And of course, as Paul Clifford, our CEO, always says, where else would you rather be than a room full of Penn Staters? In this case, restaurant full of Penn Staters. I mean, you can just look, it's just everybody was so fired up. I had not been to an away game for the first game of the season, so that was a brand new experience for me. But man, the energy that everybody had and the enthusiasm and knowing we're going to have an amazing football season, it was the best way. Met some new folks. It was just, you want to just like start jumping around because it's such a powerfully passionate time when you're around other Penn Staters that are all there because we love the same thing, and that's Penn State. And that just, there's nothing better than that. There just is nothing better than that, John.
Yeah, I agree, Kelly. And we see you there in the video there by the
was
Oh yeah, we can see you dancing. And Justin Stevens was there. Mike McHugh, our colleague, Kate Branford. As you can see, the cheerleaders and Lionettes and Nittany Lions were there. Unfortunately, the pep band, they couldn't make it, but the cheerleaders and Nittany Lions showed up sort of unannounced and just fired up the crowd immediately. That was such a great just such a great moment. And so I wanted to get that video up on screen. And that's kind of the power of the Penn State network. You go to Morgantown, West Virginia, the place is called Tropics. And so it was a nice little kind of like dreamlike state that we were in for a couple hours. Then, of course, the game on Saturday went the way that Penn Staters wanted it to go. So that was all good.
And it was a tropical temperature that night. It was definitely on the hot side. But like you said, the most important thing is we won that game after a 2-hour and 19-minute delay, was it?
Yeah, 2 hours, 19 minutes. Not quite as bad as East Lansing, but yeah, 2 hours and change. And it was an eventful weekend to start the football season.
But we got that W, John. 1-0 for that week. That's what we're always shooting for.
Yeah, for sure. And there will be lots more times to go 1-0 this season. We've got the 12-team playoff coming up, and who knows what that could bring. I try not to get too excited about a whiteout in December at Beaver Stadium with Alabama or Notre Dame coming into Happy Valley, but it's a new era of college football. But it's still nice to play those teams like West Virginia, Maryland, and Syracuse is coming up on the schedule for in a couple seasons. So kind of like the rivalry schools that students can remember from previous years.
Well, exactly, because they were all the schools, John, that when I was there that we played, before we got into the Big Ten. That was definitely, I remember Major Harris for West Virginia back in the day. He was a beast.
Yeah, he had his number retired at West Virginia. I remember Major Harris. That was a name that you kind of tend to remember. That's a good, solid football name.
I didn't really think about that, but you're absolutely right. That is a good, solid football name.
All right, we've got a few more questions here with Kelly. You are tuned into the Football Letter podcast. We are talking with volunteer leader Kelly Gibson Caplan, 1991 Penn State graduate from the College of the Liberal Arts. Kelly will be judging this weekend's homecoming parade. So if you're at the corner of College and Allen at any point during the parade, Kelly will be there at the judges table. I imagine that she will accept candy, food as bribes if you're in the parade, or if you just want to stop and say hi. We saw you with a picture of Mike the mailman. Mike is oftentimes there. Sometimes Sue will stop by.
He's always there. Mike the mailman, the last 3 years I've been there, John, he was there. So yes, he is always there.
So that's the place. So you will be in the place to be Friday night. That will be exciting. Let's continue down this little road that we started down. Speaking of Penn State memories, what was your favorite class at Penn State when you were a student?
You know what? The first thing that comes to my mind was History 143, which was the history of fascism and Nazism. So it sounds like kind of a strange class to be the favorite, but anybody that was in Penn State at that time, Dr. Jackson Spielvogel, it was like ballroom dancing. You had to try to get into his class. He was dynamic. He was amazing. I can't even tell you, like, the topic. I learned a lot, but wow, a powerful gentleman. And I was just looking him up actually not too long ago. And he's written a number of books. Like, he is the authority on those two topics. And so that was an amazing, amazing class. And I never got into ballroom dancing, but I did get into his class.
All right, we'll never say never. We have a colleague, Odile Parker, who organized a 1980s themed party recently for a volunteer conference, and so we can say, Vince, that's something we got to throw to Odile. Mention ballroom dancing, and we'll see what can happen there.
Yeah, because we were roller skating and the whole thing. So I won't be surprised if we see ballroom dancing at an upcoming event.
So when you're back at the University Park campus, Kelly, what are one or two of your favorite campus spots that might be either a little underrated or might not be at the top of somebody else's list?
Okay, so it's a little off campus, but Roth Rock Coffee on South Atherton is one of my, I'm a coffee snob, as my husband calls me. Not only do they have amazing coffee, but they have amazing food. So that is one place, of course, a lot of my favorite places, undergrad, aren't there anymore. So that's sort of sad, but Cafe 210, I mean, who doesn't want to go to Cafe 210 and have a drink in a little pitcher? I mean, it's very nostalgic and fun, and with the outdoor space. And of course, the creamery. I mean, I've got to go to the creamery. And my team here at WSSC Water, I've introduced them to Penn State ice cream. And so they are often chomping at the bit. Oh, you're going to Penn State this weekend? Or are you bringing us ice cream? So that has become some of my team members' favorites as well.
Kelly, you read my mind. I did want to mention that professionally, Kelly is a division manager at WSSC Water in Maryland, I believe.
In Maryland, that's right.
So I just want to give you a shout out. And Kelly's colleagues know her as a Penn Stater. As you can see, this is, I get the feeling, Kelly, maybe this isn't, you didn't just decorate your office for the interview. This is how it looks every day.
And I could swivel my camera around and you would see a lot more Penn State paraphernalia. Yes, people come in and they're like, wonder if she went to Penn State or not. Yeah.
All right, just a question or two to wrap up here with you, Kelly. We've talked a lot about staying connected, the camaraderie and the bonds that Penn Staters have. When you look at how Penn State has shaped you as a person, as a professional, we take the line from the alma mater. How has Penn State shaped you as a person and a professional?
Thou did mold us, dear old state. Gosh, so many ways. So from a service perspective, I was in Alpha Phi Omega, which is a co-ed service fraternity. And growing up, I had always been very service oriented. That's what my parents showed me. And so that just continued to grow, and that giving back and going to the hub and donating blood. So it really grew my love and my passion for service and for volunteering. So that's certainly an important factor. I guess the other thing, and I said it before, but the leadership, like the opportunity to lead student groups and to get that experience and to learn how to collaborate and work with others and teamwork, like that was also a really important part of my journey. Just all of those leadership opportunities that I had while I was at Penn State. So I just, my passion just continues to grow. And, I talk to people that aren't associated with Penn State and they're like, well, what is it about Penn State that you're so passionate about? And it's almost sometimes hard to put into words, but it boils down to one thing, because I really reflect back on Be a Part from the Start, which I remember back in 1987 being in Rec Hall and having the cheerleaders and the lion and the band and all of that enthusiasm. Like that is where it started. And that is a Penn State Alumni Association event. But that's where it really started, and it has just grown from there. And so all that I learned at Penn State just really sharpened me and allowed me to become the professional that I am. And as I go forward, just continuing to connect with Penn Staters. You never have to go very far before you see somebody with a Penn State shirt on, or a license plate or whatever. So it has changed my life and has been an amazing ride while I was at Penn State ever since. And I just continue to look forward to all the future things and service and the things that I can do for the university and for the Alumni Association.
Well, we are so grateful to you, Kelly, and for all that you do. This was such a treat. Anytime I see Kelly on campus at an event, she is always the life of the party. Big smile, big energy. This has been such a joy to talk with you, Kelly. Thank you so much for stopping by the podcast, and thanks for all you do.
My privilege. It has been amazing and fun. And John, thanks so much for having me.
Anytime, Kelly. We got to have you back on.
I would love it.
All right, Kelly Gibson Caplan, everyone.